Now, most entrepreneurs have been through some turbulent moments in the last few months. The economy of the country has not been growing. Even prior to the impact of COVID-19, some businesses had to scale down and close due to the failing economy. The big question on many entrepreneurs' minds is how the president will address the plight of those trying to resurrect the economy. Joining us to expand on this discussion is Thina Nodada from Growth Point, Shawn, Theunissen, founder of Property Point, and Celeste, Roux, CEO of React 24. Very good morning to you all. Thank you so much for joining us. I suppose this is one of those nail-biting evenings where you are looking to hear something of substance when it comes to what the president will be delivering, especially when it comes to entrepreneurship. I mean, 2.2 million jobs have been lost in the second quarter of 2020. It brings the total number of unemployed to 4.3 million. It's a substantial amount. Let me start with you, Shawn. What are your expectations?
I think definitely one of the key expectations is really to see how we're going to address some of the unemployment challenges. We know that small businesses are the caveat for that, for creating jobs in the economy. So the support of small businesses, access to funding for small businesses is going to be critical. I think secondly, just promoting the local economy and local economic development. How are we able to create that stimulus for small businesses to gain access into the marketplace? And then also making sure that even with the infrastructure-led recovery program, are we creating access for small businesses within that space? Is it just going, where does big business and small business work together? And that also leads to specifically support programs for small businesses. Where is government and the private sector partnering up in order to provide support for incubation and acceleration programs? And then also township economies. I think I definitely want to hear a bit more around what is going to be put in place for the township economies, specifically also funding there. 2019, the president spoke about a township fund. We've heard and seen nothing as yet. So what's happening with that?
Thina, what's your take and looking at some of your expectations?
Okay, thank you for having me. Just to clarify something, I'm not from Growth Point. We are from Waymaker Trade Solutions. So, and yes, my name is Thina Nodada. Yeah, it's going to be an interesting evening. What I would like to hear quite a bit, our expertise lie within logistics, supply chain management, and international trade. So, with the introduction of the launch of the Africa Continental Free Trade Area Agreement, I'd like to see and hear from the president what he has in mind as how South African SMMEs will start to become players, as global players in the international economy, particularly with the Africa Continental Free Trade Area that has started. So I'm quite interested to hear and see what are the roles, what are the changes that are going to happen within the incubators that have a lot of SMMEs underneath them. I'm also quite interested to hear what's going to be happening with industry associations and some of our leading state-owned enterprises, and lastly, your DTIs, your DIRCOs. What role will they be playing in ensuring that South African SMMEs can actually become players within this Africa Continental Free Trade Area and global trade as a whole? Absolutely.
Celeste, talk us through some of your expectations.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. Well, firstly, I think our president it's like no other today, with being virtual and not having the pomp and the fanfare. But for me as a woman-owned SMME, I certainly will be looking at what awareness and what access is there to information and opportunities that can help our businesses, especially being a woman-owned enterprise. And I think then we also need to look at creating a demand for local products and services. We'd also want to know how government is going to approach boosting the national entrepreneurship ecosystem. Where do we fit in? And are there going to be programs that are going to prioritize small businesses as suppliers, perhaps? And so I think that is where government, public and private sectors have to work together. We're also going to be looking at driving innovation and research and development during this time. So there's certainly quite a lot of questions on our side as well. What programs are going to be there? What packages are they going to be there? We're not through COVID yet, and we're facing challenges already. So a lot of questions.
With all the questions in mind, just bringing the conversation back in studio here, looking at you, Shawn, all three of you speak about the importance of promoting local. And we heard a lot about that, during this lockdown period, where the president was saying that the borders are essentially closed and the focus now is on local production and sprucing up the local economy and ensuring that businesses do indeed support each other. When it comes to the local market, what are some of the big challenges there in that space? Because, of course, we know that there are many sort of standards that need to be met for placing products, for instance, and those sort of dynamics.
I think the challenges that we find is really very much access to markets. So how are we creating pathways for SMMEs in order to get their offerings into the fore? I think if we look at the South African market, it's still very much dominated by dominant players in terms of your retail offerings. So how are we getting smaller retailers into retail centers? How are we providing access for product placement? So there needs to be a focus in terms of government support in getting these, for instance, if we look at the product market, getting those accreditation processes more streamlined, the compliance component a bit more streamlined, and also more cost effective. For a small business to take a product to market, it is expensive. And once they have that process, being able to market it, whether it's to other businesses, consumer, becomes an additional challenge for them. So incubation support for that is also quite critical. And being able to make sure that we get that level of endorsement, both from private sector and government sector.
Thina, as I look to you and point your question, we heard this morning Minister in the Presidency speaking about how, they have essentially the plans are good, and her saying that the resources are the only limitation, and they're trying to bridge their way past that and find some sort of leeway to allow small business and small players to enter the fray. When it comes to, making and promoting local, what do you believe the president should speak to, especially as a person on the ground, as an entrepreneur, and the challenges that you experience on a day-to-day basis?
Okay, I would say part of the challenges that SMMEs are experiencing is from a production capacity side, when you're looking at doing local trade. So by getting into retailers, into South African retailers like your bigger ones, your Pick n Pays and your Spars, you tend to find that there's a certain period of time, payment period. So it may take that you can put your stock in and it takes 2 months or 3 months before you can actually get payment for that stock, which creates a cash flow problem for the SMMEs. So it would be good to hear what can be done in terms of financing and allowing these small players to have the production capacity, because it's one thing to now be able to get into a retailer, but are you actually able to fill that demand? And that's what I think a lot of SMMEs sort of struggle with. And if we could have, support for them in that sense, where if there is an appetite from the retailer to have the product, there should be sort of a method to assess what still needs to be completed, what investment needs to be made into this business, because we can see that there's an appetite for the product. Yeah.
Celeste, there is always some sort of mention when it comes to women-owned businesses, and there's always plans on how women will be included in business and how opportunities need to be provided for women. When it comes to some of the challenges that you're experiencing as a woman-owned SMME, you spoke earlier to the fact that there is a limitation when it comes to access to information to help business and boosting business. What would you like to hear the president address specifically when it comes to this space?
Yes, certainly. I think, as a woman-owned enterprise, we certainly have barriers to entry. And so we would be looking at access, and let's talk about access to funds. As an entrepreneur, and you go to a lending institution, these lending institutions are risk averse, and so although you supply them with your business plan and your projections, you're not looked at favorably necessarily. Although I think that is very short-sighted, because inevitably entrepreneurs are going to employ more people. More people means economic activity, which means they'll be doing business in the banking sector. opening bank accounts, home loans, etc. So we shouldn't be short-sighted in that respect. So I'd definitely be looking at that, but also practical plans, Paul, practical plans with rapid implementation. That's what I'd certainly be looking at and hoping for.
And where are we standing, Thina? Let me take this to you. Where are we standing in terms of moving forward? I mean, businesses have shut, and as entrepreneurs, I'm sure you must be feeling the pinch of the impact of COVID-19 and the way forward in terms of access. Access seems to be the operative word here. Access to funds, access to opportunities, access to the bigger dynamics when it comes to small versus big business.
Yeah. No, definitely important. If you look at the stats from the Banking Association of South Africa, where the 200 billion rand grant was passed out by the government, only 17.84 billion rand of that was actually approved, which equals about 8.92% of funding actually going through into the hands of entrepreneurs and those who are in need. So you do tend to find, even if you look at the Department of Small Business Development as well, there was 59.7% of all applications for grants were found to be incomplete. So we're finding that there's a lot of support there in terms of the monetary amount, but how to get it to the hands. And like was just mentioned now, access to information. I think that is where we're sort of battling to do that. But if I were to say the way forward, better access to information, and more so, we need to be, as a country, gearing our small and medium-sized businesses towards international trade. With us mentioning and knowing of the launch of the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, the time has come where international trade is just a hoax or a faraway ghost that we don't entertain in the South African economy for small SMMEs. We need to be educating them. What we need to understand is that internationally, COVID has broken supply chains. There will be new forming of supply chains, so new businesses will come out now. So we would be shortchanging ourselves as a country if our SMMEs were to limit themselves only to our domestic economy, which has lost buying power due to an economy that was going down, and then over and above COVID, then also just created an even more massive impact on that. So, yeah, I would say that one of the key areas would be to take international trade seriously, and how to gear SMMEs towards it. And it's not a situation in Paul where you can just simply say and leave it to the responsibility of the SMMEs. You need those support from those associations and departments that I've just mentioned.
I mean, you speak about essentially export capabilities here and opportunities.
Yeah.
When it comes to the red tape, Shawn, what information is required from government to move past the barriers to allow South African businesses to really go out and have an international footprint?
Yeah, I think that typically when we start looking at the red tape for small businesses, the cost of compliance in South Africa is extremely high. The small businesses need to jump through the same hoops as what a big business needs to jump through in terms of making sure that all their compliance is in order, and creating it a bit more seamless for them. So the focus should be on how do we streamline that process in order for small businesses to be able to operate more effectively. I think we also need to start looking at some tax incentives for small businesses, and that those tax incentives will be able to make them more competitive on a global market as well. So your compliance cost within a small business just does not make it as competitive as you would want it to be out in the marketplace. And being able to have those also export programs like was mentioned earlier does create a new market access for small businesses because it does open up. And I always typically say that when we look at the South African context, businesses are gearing up to do business, for instance, from Johannesburg in Cape Town or any other province. But it's a 2-hour flight to Zambia. Namibia is on our borders. So we have a SADC region that is accessible for us to be able to engage in effectively, and being able to create that ease of doing business is going to be critical. How are we able to relax visa restrictions, for instance, trade restrictions for setting up businesses across the borders. Those are some of the practical elements that needs to come into play as well.
I think we're in agreement, well, between the three of you, that cash is indeed king in this aspect. Celeste, I want to take this question to you. When it comes to business incubators and accelerators, we hear so much about the private and public sectors launching these various entrepreneurial development hubs. But when it comes to how much of an impact they have on business and growth, are you finding them effective, or perhaps, should we have less of them that do more work, or more of them that, don't necessarily help as much as they should?
Thank you for the question. Our company React24 has been very fortunate to work with, Property Point in that respect. And what they've given our business was access to information, to skill our people, to build capacity that we might not have had on our own. So I think we should have more enterprise development programs, but effective ones. We really are geared up to take on, and service people in the way that they need to be. So I think more effective enterprise development programs are definitely needed. We do need the help and we do need assistance. I certainly think that it should be mandated in the public sector, but also to a certain extent in the private sector. I think that should be very helpful, because if you think of the big players and they're getting hundreds of millions of rands and an opportunity, what are they doing to include small businesses in those projects? And,
as you speak about the projects and the improvement that's needed in the certain businesses, I know that a lot has been mentioned, throughout the course of this morning as we've been speaking to various politicians about the Economic Reconstruction and Recovery Plan. I don't know how much you know about the information that's contained in there, but I do know that there has been a lot of concern that it's very vague and it's not detailed enough and it needs more substance. What would your take be on that, Shawn?
I think, if we start looking at what entrepreneurs want to hear on the ground, is they want practical solutions. And I think a lot of the times when we start looking at the plans, the economic recovery plan, it's very high level in terms of what are some of the things that needs to be put in place. We're going to have infrastructure development programs or recovery programs. But entrepreneurs want to hear, how do they get involved? How do they access these opportunities? And is government actually carving out a space for them? What does it actually mean for them on the ground? Are they going to have access to those opportunities, access to the funding opportunities? How do they actually get into these supply chain opportunities? And those are some of the practical elements that I think government needs to be able to outline in the plans. The plans tend to be quite high level, but lacking a lot of detail. And I think this has been a common thread, specifically throughout the COVID period as well, where government is saying stuff to entrepreneurs, but not being practical in terms of how it will be implemented and how they are able to access it.
And as an entrepreneur, how have you been absorbing this information that's been sent out, Thina, especially during this time where, you've been told as business people to be innovative, and perhaps if one business opportunity fails, there's room to think up a better business or a better idea during a pandemic?
Yeah, no, I think I'll agree with the gentleman here that there's a disconnect between theory and application. So they've got the economic recovery plan and what's put out there, it's sort of high level compared to what is actually going on the ground. And I think, I'll bring it back to that same point in the lack of access to information. I know that, a lot of information is trying to be put out there via the news, radio, but it's just not getting down to the people on the ground. Yeah, even that economic recovery plan, I'd be surprised how many of of the entrepreneurs are actually well informed of what is actually entailed there for them.
And Celeste, just bringing the conversation back to you. You are CEO of React24, a property services company, and property has really been doing quite well during this time. Looking at how property has been doing well, and looking at the impact perhaps of COVID-19 on other businesses, What room for growth and opportunity have you identified during this crisis with a business that's going well and perhaps looking at the other aspects of growth within the sector?
I think, Paul, the only reason, that we were able to sort of navigate the crisis was the ability to pivot. And I would encourage any small business to sort of have the agility to pivot. So by sort of looking at your bouquet offering, and so what other products could you include to your clients? My only concern with this whole infrastructure, especially with construction, where lots of jobs are promised, do we have the skill to go with those opportunities? And so government needs to go back to practical implementation. So those skills, are they aligned with the opportunities? And so entrepreneurs like myself, not only just servicing the property industry, but we've opened up a CETA accredited, the first woman-owned CETA accredited plumbing college for that very reason, so that when those opportunities are available, our people are skilled and they get paid what they are worth.
Skills being aligned to opportunities is a really important one here, Shawn. I mean, it makes a lot of sense with so many changes that we're experiencing in the world.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think that when we start looking at our level of unemployment, we want to make sure that we are focusing on skills. Specifically, as Celeste mentioned, within for instance, the construction industry and property industry, those artisan skills are needed in order for us to be able to feed into, for instance, the infrastructure development program. You're going to need plumbers, you're going to need builders, you're going to need welders. And those artisan skills are critical in an economy that needs to recover. Mm-hmm. And I think that's where the focus needs to be. Are we building the skills that's needed in the small businesses and in big businesses to take the economy forward?
And Thina, what's your take on skills development?
Yeah, okay. Agreeing with Shawn there again. I think skills is quite key to any development because it's what allows people to actually perform at their area of expertise. So I would say, looking at it from a skill point of view, South Africans, if we are looking at, I'm going to bring it back to the international trade space.
Yes.
And I would say the problem that we have within the SMMEs and international trade and trading with our cross-border nations is actually the lack of knowledge and skill again and how the whole entire process works. And it's a major concern because if you do not have people that have the skill and have the know-how on how these processes work, it can be a very dangerous game to play with SMMEs because international trade can be high capital outlay. Mm-hmm. Now, if you lack skills in terms of how to clear goods into a country, if you lack skills of knowing which mode of transport is most ideal for your goods, do your goods need to be moving in a refrigerated container or not? These things can have dire consequences for small and big business for that matter. So from a skill set perspective, I think that we would need to up the skill level of the entrepreneurs, but it's not only on the entrepreneurs and the SMME owners. We need to have a skill set level within the associations, within the DTIs and the DIRCOs and the import and export desks that are being formed to ensure that that we don't enter into this international trade and entice our SMMEs by saying, hey guys, you've got appetite in Botswana, you've got appetite in Australia. And then when the process happens, due to a lack of skill, it fails. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for your time. Thanking my three guests on the Entrepreneurs Roundtable, Thina Nodada, Shawn, Theunissen and Celeste Roux. Entrepreneurs who will be keeping a very close eye and looking at every single word the President has to say when it comes to access to information being a huge factor here, as well as creating demand for local products and services, some of the points that came out of this discussion. Thank you for your time.